Today we are going to go over inverse functions. This is Skill 10. And I think what we're going to talk about is the concept of swapping our x's and y's and solving for them. So the concept of an inverse function is that if I have a function that's like f of x equals 2x, how do I find the opposite of that? This is going to give me a line, for instance, that takes me on a journey, takes me this place. And if I want to go back, how am I going to do that? Well, the general rule is it's not that we can't go back, it's that we have to change our function a little bit. We have to swap them. So what I mean by that is to solve for an inverse, the first step we're going to do is swap x and y. And that is as simple as it sounds. Don't overcomplicate it. For instance, in our example function, if I were swapping my x's and y's, I know that f of x is the same thing as y. I can write that like this. I want to swap where my x and my y are. So my x goes over to the left, and my y goes to sit behind that 2 right there. Simple enough. All I did is pick it up and swap it. There's no mathematical operation that I performed yet. The second step is the math. It is solving for y. So in our example right here, I have x equals 2y. I'm going to divide both sides by 2 because I need y by itself. So this is my inverse operation. I'm multiplying by 2, so the inverse of that is dividing by 2. These 2's will cancel out, and that becomes x over 2 is equal to y. Now I have y by itself. Because y by itself, and it is an inverse, I label it by putting that little negative 1 up there. That just means it's an inverse. That's all it means. So the inverse of y equals 2x is x over 2, or 1/2 x. Simple enough. Let's try a couple of examples. So I have 3 right here that we're going to work out together. The first one says for the function f of x equals the square root of x over 5, find f of negative 1 of x, or the inverse. This is another way of writing the inverse of a function right here. So it's just asking us to find the inverse. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write this in terms of x and y. So my f of x is going to become a y. I have a square root here over 5. Now I'm going to swap. This is my step 1 right here. I'm going to swap my x and my y. So this becomes x is equal to the square root of y over 5. Now step 2, I'm going to solve for that. So I'm going to take my inverse operations. The first thing I have to do here is I have to multiply by 5. I have to move this 5 out of here. So this becomes 5x. I have to multiply both sides by 5. This becomes 5x equals the square root of y. Now the inverse of square roots is to raise it to the exponent. So if I'm taking the cube root, say, or the 4th root or the 5th root, I'm going to raise it to that exponent. So this is going to cancel out. This square and this square root are going to cancel out. But I have to do it to this side as well. So that means that 5x squared equals y. And the reason that this squared is on the outside with these parentheses surrounding it is because I have to square the entire left side, not just the x. And now I am done. My y is by itself, so I label it with this inverse option, this little negative 1. My next one says for the function f of x equals 8x cubed, find the inverse. Find the inverse, that's what this means. So I'm going to swap it, write it in terms of x and y. This becomes y equals 8x to the 3rd. And now I'm going to swap my x and y. That becomes x equals 8y cubed. And now I'm going to solve for it. So the first thing I'm going to do is divide by 8. I need to get this exponent by itself. Right here. These 8's will cancel. I'm multiplying, so the inverse of that is division. So I have x over 8 is equal to y cubed. Now again, if I look back at my previous example, the inverse of a square root is squaring it. So the inverse of cubing something is going to be taking the cube root of it, and that's how we label it. We put this little 3 on the outside of our square root sign. And if I do that to that side, I have to do it to this side. So this becomes, these cancel right here. This leaves me with y, the cube root of 8 over, or x over 8, which is our answer right here. We're done. Pretty simple, I think. They get a little bit more complicated as you add more steps to it, but if you can generally understand that what I want you to do is swap where your x and y are to start and then just solve for y again, you're on the right track and you will be able to master this skill. So for our last one, we are asked f of x equals 3 times the cube root of x minus 5, and it wants us to find what f of negative 1 of x is, or the inverse. Again, this is the inverse, right? Oh, I didn't put my inverse on here when I was done. Lily, if you were in class, you could catch some candy for that. So we have the 3, I'm going to rewrite this first. I'm going to write this in terms of y, because that's what I've been taught to do. Y equals 3 times the cube root of x minus 5. And now I swap where my x's and y's are. So this becomes x equals, excuse me, excuse me, there we go, 3 times the cube root of y minus 5. Nothing else changed, just my x's and my y's. So now I solve for it. So the first thing I need to do is I work from the outside, right? I work from the outside in to my variables. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is adding 5 to both sides, because these are going to cancel out. This x plus 5 is going to equal 3 times the cube root of y. Okay? The next step is this 3 over here. This 3 needs to go away. I'm going to divide by 3 on both sides. These will cancel out. And that will leave me with x plus 5 over 3 is equal to the cube root of y. I'm going to bring this back up here just a moment. X plus 5 over 3 equals the cube root of y. So again, like we did on our previous problem, we're going to cube this to get rid of our cube root, which means that I have to cube all of this. And that gives me x plus 5 over 3 cubed is equal to y. And y is by itself now, so I can rewrite that as an inverse. And if you ever feel fancy, you can write it as f of negative 1 of x as well. These mean the same thing. So if you have any more questions, you can feel free to email me. Hopefully this clarifies the general concept that we're looking for in this skill.